In this world, the Roman emperors often wore Egyptian crowns alongside their laurel wreaths and consulted priests of Isis before major campaigns. Alexandria, not Rome, pulsed as the heart of an empire stretching from Britain to Bactria, its great library holding scrolls detailing steam engines developed in the 2nd century AD. And for centuries, the dominant language of power across the Mediterranean was Greek, with Latin considered a somewhat provincial tongue. Number 13. The Serpentine Eagle. A new imperial dawn. The victory at Actium, in this timeline, belonged to the combined fleets of Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra II. Octavian's forces were scattered, his ambitions shattered against the rocks of the Ionian coast. Antony, ever the pragmatist beneath the veneer of the soldier, and Cleopatra, a ruler of unmatched intellect and dynastic determination, did not simply declare victory. They initiated a fundamental restructuring of Roman power. The res publica, already a hollow shell, was formally repurposed. Antony, while maintaining influence in Rome through loyal partisans and his sheer military clout, established his primary seat of power alongside Cleopatra in Alexandria. The donations of Alexandria, once a propaganda point for Octavian, became reality. Their children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra, Selene II, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were not just recognized, but were actively integrated into a new imperial framework. Rome became the Western administrative capital, a prestigious but secondary hub. Alexandria, with its wealth, strategic location, and deep cultural roots, became the true nexus of this new world order. The initial years saw a delicate dance. Roman legions, still the backbone of military power, were gradually intertwined with Egyptian naval traditions and Ptolemaic administrator genius. Antony, presented as the new Dionysus, and Cleopatra, the living Isis, forged an ideology that blended Roman martial prowess with the divine authority of pharaohs and the sophisticated appeal of Hellenistic monarchy. This wasn't merely a Roman empire with an Eastern flavor. It was a new entity, a Serpentine Eagle, its gaze fixed as much on the riches of the Orient as on the traditional Western territories. Coins minted in Alexandria bore dual inscriptions in Greek and Latin, often with Antony on one side and Cleopatra crowned as a goddess on the other. The Senate in Rome continued to meet, but its decrees often required ratification from the Alexandrian court, a subtle but profound shift in the balance of power that would redefine Roman for centuries to come. Number 12. Alexandria Unbound. The world's metropolis. With the political center of gravity shifted, Alexandria exploded in size and splendor. It dwarfed Rome, not just in intellectual vibrancy already its hallmark, but in sheer scale and opulence. Cleopatra, a master of grand gestures and urban planning, initiated vast construction projects. The ancient Heptasteon connecting an island to the mainland was widened, creating new harbors capable of docking hundreds of warships and thousands of merchant vessels simultaneously. Canopic, the city's main artery, was extended and adorned with new temples, theaters, and public buildings, each a testament to the fusion of Egyptian, Greek, and Roman aesthetics. Colossal statues of Antony as Heracles, Mars, and Cleopatra as Aphrodite, Isis lined its path. The motion and its great library, already the intellectual heart of the Mediterranean, received unprecedented funding and imperial patronage. Scholars, artists, engineers, and philosophers flocked to Alexandria from every corner of the known world. Gauls, Iberians, Nubians, Arabs, Persians, and even envoys from the distant Kushan and Han empires. The city became a melting pot where dozens of languages were spoken in the marketplace. Yet, Greek, the language of the Ptolemies and now the imperial court, predominated. New districts arose, dedicated to specific trades or ethnic communities, each contributing to the city's dynamic, cosmopolitan character. Aqueducts, inspired by Roman engineering but improved, with Alexandrian ingenuity, brought fresh water to a population that swelled to over 1 million within a few decades. The Pharos lighthouse, already a wonder, was further embellished. Its light said to be visible from even greater distances, a beacon for a new era, centered on the Nile Delta. Rome, while still a grand city, began to feel provincial in comparison, its glory reflecting a past age rather than the vibrant, forward-looking dynamism of Alexandria. Number 11. The Divine Synthesis. Isis and Serapis rule the pantheon. The religious landscape of the empire underwent a profound transformation. Cleopatra, as a high priestess of Isis and a divine monarch in the Egyptian tradition, elevated the cults of Isis and Serapis to preeminence within the imperial family and, consequently, across their vast domains. While Roman state gods, like Jupiter and Mars, were still honored, their significance was subtly recontextualized. Antony, long associated with Dionysus and Heracles, found these aspects amplified and merged with Egyptian deities like Osiris. Temples to Isis, recognizable by their unique pylon gateways and sphinx-lined avenues, sprang up in cities from Londinium to Antioch, often larger and more lavishly decorated than those of the traditional Roman pantheon. Serapis, a Greco-Egyptian god embodying abundance and the afterlife, became particularly popular among merchants and soldiers. The imperial cult, a cornerstone of Roman political ideology, now centered on the divine couple of Antony, Dionysus, Osiris, and Cleopatra, Isis, Aphrodite. Their images, imbued with sacred aura, were worshipped throughout the empire. This wasn't a suppression of other faiths, but rather a syncretic embrace, with local deities often being identified with or absorbed into the dominant Greco-Egyptian forms. Mystery cults, which offered personal salvation and a direct experience of the divine, flourished under this new regime as they resonated with the emotional and spiritual intensity of the Isiac and Serapic traditions. The official state calendar was reformed to include major Egyptian religious festivals, celebrated with grand public processions, music, and feasting, further embedding these new spiritual currents into the daily life of the empire's diverse populations. This religious fusion created a vibrant spiritual marketplace, profoundly altering the conditions into which later monotheistic faiths would emerge. Number 10. The Hellenic tone. Latin takes a backseat. While Rome remained an important administrative center for the Western provinces, the linguistic tide turned decisively in favor of Greek. Cleopatra, fluent in multiple languages, including Egyptian and Greek, and notably the first Ptolemy to speak Egyptian, made Greek the primary language of the imperial court in Alexandria. Antony, comfortable in Greek from his long years in the East, readily adopted this. Imperial decrees, official correspondence, major literary works, and philosophical treatises emanating from the new heart of the empire were composed in Koine Greek. Latin, while still used for local administration in Italy and the western provinces, and remaining the language of the Roman legions for a time, lost its status as the undisputed language of power and high culture. Educated individuals across the empire, from Iberia to Syria, increasingly saw fluency in Greek as essential for advancement and cultural participation. The great works of Roman literature, while preserved, were often overshadowed by a new wave of Greek writing, sponsored by the Alexandrian court, which celebrated the glories of the new Antonian Ptolemaic dynasty and explored the fusion of Hellenic and Egyptian thought. Schools across the empire barditized Greek instruction. Even in Rome, the elite increasingly sent their children to Greek tutors to ensure they were not left behind. Over generations, this linguistic shift had far-reaching consequences, influencing everything from legal terminology to the dominant forms of poetry and rhetoric. The Latin West and Greek East division, which had always been a cultural reality, now saw the Greek East not just as an equal, but as the leading linguistic and cultural force within the entire imperial structure. This fundamentally altered the legacy that would be passed down to successor states and cultures. Number 9. The Library Reborn. 1,000 years of accelerated discovery. The Great Library of Alexandria, which had suffered setbacks in earlier Roman conflicts, experienced an unprecedented renaissance under the direct patronage of Cleopatra and Antony. Viewing it not just as a repository of knowledge, but as an engine of innovation and imperial prestige, they poured vast resources into its expansion and the acquisition of scrolls from every corner of the known world. Expeditions were dispatched to India, Persia, and even the fringes of the Chinese Han dynasty, returning with texts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering previously unknown in the Mediterranean world. Competitive spirit that once existed between the Library of Alexandria and the Library of Pergamum was now channeled into a singular imperial project. Generations of scholars freed from the political instability that had plagued the late Ptolemaic kingdom and the Roman Republic worked in an environment of sustained support and intellectual ferment. Hero of Alexandria's work on steam power and automata, instead of remaining theoretical novelties, found practical applications, encouraged by an imperial court fascinated with technological marvels. Advances in mathematics, building on Euclid and Archimedes, led to new breakthroughs in engineering and architecture. Astronomical observations, meticulously recorded and analyzed, refined the calendar and improved navigation. Medical knowledge, combining Hippocratic traditions with Egyptian pharmacology and even elements of Etruscan medicine brought via new trade routes, led to improved public health initiatives in major cities. This sustained golden age of the library meant that scientific and technological progress, which historically stagnated or regressed in our timeline after the classical period, continued its upward trajectories, laying the groundwork for discoveries centuries ahead of their time. The very concept of empirical research and systematic knowledge accumulation became a cornerstone of imperial identity. Number 8. Legions of the Nile. A new military paradigm. The Roman military machine, the foundation of its expansive power, underwent significant evolution under Antonian Ptolemaic rule. While the core discipline and organization of the legions were retained, new elements were integrated. Antony, always popular with his soldiers, ensured their loyalty through generous donatives and by personally leading them in campaigns, often styled as a triumphant Hellenistic king rather than a Roman imperator. Cleopatra's influence brought a greater emphasis on naval power, a traditional Ptolemaic strength. The Mediterranean became an Alexandrian lake, policed by powerful fleets built in Egyptian and Syrian shipyards, incorporating both Roman and Hellenistic naval designs. These fleets secured vital grain routes and projected power across the sea with unmatched efficiency. On land, Roman legions began to incorporate specialized units drawn from the eastern provinces, including highly skilled archers, cataphract style, heavy cavalry inspired by Parthian models, and even contingents of war elephants managed by mahouts. Egyptian military traditions, particularly in siegecraft and desert warfare, were studied and adapted. Praetorian Guard, while still prestigious, found its influence balanced by newly formed Ptolemaic Guard units, fiercely loyal to Cleopatra and her children, often composed of Macedonians, Greeks, and Egyptians. The strategic focus of the empire also shifted. While frontiers in Britain and along the Rhine were maintained, greater military resources were devoted to the east, securing the Red Sea trade routes, managing relations with Parthia, and even extending influence towards Arabia Felix and the Horn of Africa. Military iconography changed too, with standards often bearing a mix of Roman eagles, Egyptian cobras, and Hellenistic solar symbols. Number 7. The Eastern Concord. Parthian peace. and the Silk Road's golden age. Marcus Antonius. Having learned hard lessons from his earlier campaigns against Parthia, and with Cleopatra's diplomatic acumen at his side, pursued a radically different policy towards the great Eastern Empire. Instead of perpetual conflict, a grand treaty was negotiated. This perpetual peace of the Euphrates, signed amidst opulent ceremonies in a neutral city like Palmyra, established clear borders, mutual defense pacts against nomadic tribes from Central Asia, and, crucially, unprecedented trade agreements. The Silk Road, which had previously seen intermittent and often risky commerce, now flourished under joint Antonian-Parthian security. Caravans laden with silk, spices, precious stones, and exotic goods flowed freely between the Mediterranean world and the Han dynasty's westernmost outposts, enriching both empires immensely. Alexandrian merchants and Roman entrepreneurs established trading posts deep into Parthian territory and beyond, while Parthian envoys and merchants became common sights in Alexandria and Antioch. This detente also allowed for a significant cultural exchange. Hellenistic art and philosophy found new audiences in the East, while Persian and Indian ideas, religions, and artistic styles permeated the Antonian Empire, contributing to its vibrant, syncretic culture. With the eastern frontier largely pacified and prosperous, military resources could be redirected. Some legions were tasked with securing these vital trade routes, effectively becoming Silk Road guardians. The wealth generated from this eastern trade further cemented Alexandria's position as the commercial hub of the world and funded many of the grand projects undertaken by the dynasty. This era of peace and trade fundamentally reoriented the empire's perspective, looking as much towards the rising sun as towards its European territories. Number 6. The Julian star shines through Cesarian. Ptolemy XV Caesar, known as Cesarian, the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, was not executed as a threat in this world. Instead, following Antony and Cleopatra's victory, he was formally acknowledged by Antony as Caesar's true heir and elevated to a position of prominence. While Antony's own children with Cleopatra were designated as rulers of specific eastern territories, Cesarian, as the biological son of the deified Julius, held a unique and potent legitimacy, particularly in the eyes of many former Cesarian loyalists. He became a co-ruler with his mother in Egypt and was groomed as a future leader of the entire imperial edifice, blending the Julian lineage with the Ptolemaic. This created a powerful dynastic narrative. The union of Rome's greatest general and Egypt's ancient royal bloodline destined to rule the world. Cesarian, educated in both Roman and Hellenistic traditions under the finest tutors in Alexandria, grew to be a matic and capable figure. He often appeared alongside Antony and Cleopatra during public ceremonies, symbolizing the harmonious fusion of West and East. His existence and acknowledged status effectively sidelined Octavian's claims to be Caesar's sole political successor, even in Italy. Over time, as Antony aged Cesarian increasingly took on administrative and even military responsibilities, demonstrating a keen intellect inherited from both parents. The Julian star, once threatened with extinguishment by civil war, now shone brightly from Alexandria, promising a continuity that resonated with many Romans while being firmly anchored in the new Hellenistic Egyptian imperial center. His eventual succession, perhaps alongside or in concert with Antony's children by Cleopatra, ensured the long-term stability of this new world order, creating a dynasty that was both Roman and Ptolemaic. Number 5. The Dionysian Empire, a culture of spectacle and splendor. The austerity and traditional Roman virtues that Octavian, in our timeline Augustus, championed never became the dominant cultural tone of the empire. Instead, under the influence of Antony and Cleopatra, the empire embraced a culture of Dionysian revelry. characterized by grand public spectacles, lavish festivals, and an open appreciation for the pleasures of life. Antony, who famously identified with Dionysus, and Cleopatra, who cultivated an image of divine opulence, set the standard. Cities across the empire competed to host the most extravagant games, theatrical performances, and religious celebrations. The Isiac festivals in particular became empire-wide holidays filled with music, dancing, and feasting, far more vibrant and participatory than the more staid Roman rituals. Patronage of the arts flourished, but with a preference for works that were dramatic, colorful, and emotionally expressive, reflecting Hellenistic and Eastern tastes more than classical Roman restraint. Public architecture featured more elaborate ornamentation, extensive use of mosaics depicting mythological revels, and grand processional ways. The imperial court in Alexandria was famed for its sumptuous banquets, its patronage of poets who sang of love and adventure, and its embrace of exotic fashions and customs brought from the East. While order and administration were maintained, the prevailing ethos was one of enjoying the fruits of empire. This cultural shift had a profound impact on social mores. There was a greater tolerance for diverse lifestyles, and a less rigid adherence to traditional Roman family structures, influenced by both Hellenistic individualism and Egyptian traditions regarding gender and status. The empire was, in essence, a more flamboyant, expressive, and perhaps more outwardly joyful place, though critics in more conservative Roman circles occasionally grumbled about decadence and the decline of old virtues. Number 4. Jerusalem's enduring temple, a sanctuary in a shifting world. Cleopatra's historical interactions with Judea and Herod the Great were complex, but in this new reality a more stable and favorable arrangement was forged. With the East now the center of imperial power, and with Antony and Cleopatra keen to secure alliances and stability in the volatile Levant, Judea received a special protected status. Herod, or his successors, navigating the new power dynamics, pledged unwavering loyalty to the Alexandrian throne. In return, the temple in Jerusalem, the heart of Jewish religious life, received explicit imperial guarantees of protection and autonomy. This patronage extended to Jewish communities throughout the empire, particularly the large and influential one in Alexandria itself. As a result, the series of devastating Jewish-Roman wars that, in our timeline, led to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD and the diaspora did not occur. The temple continued to stand as a major religious center, and Jewish theological development proceeded along a different path, without the cataclysmic rupture of its central institution. Pilgrimage to Jerusalem continued, and the Sanhedrin retained its authority. This had significant implications for the nascent Christian movement. Emerging within a Judaism that still possessed its temple and a degree of political stability, early Christian groups might have remained more closely identified as a Jewish sect for longer, or their theological divergences might have taken different forms, less defined by a parting of the ways, forced by external catastrophe. The religious landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean remained a complex tapestry of flourishing local cults, imperial Greco, Egyptian deities, and a vibrant temple-centered Judaism. Number 3. The untamed North, Europe's wilder frontier. With the empire's strategic and economic focus decisively shifted eastward towards the riches of the Silk Road, the stability of the Parthian frontier, and the maritime trade of the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, less imperial energy and fewer resources were dedicated to the conquest and intensive Romanization of northern Europe. While existing provinces like Gaul and parts of Britannia were maintained, there were no further large-scale campaigns to push the frontiers deep into Germania across the Rhine, or to fully subdue the more remote highland tribes of Britain. The vast forests and marshes of northern Europe remained largely the domain of independent Celtic and Germanic peoples. Roman policy in these regions became one of containment and buffer zones, rather than aggressive expansion. Fortifications along the Rhine and Danube were maintained, but often manned by locally recruited auxiliaries rather than prime legions, which were typically stationed in the east or held in reserve for major imperial priorities. This had several long-term consequences. Germanic and Celtic cultures developed with less direct Roman influence, retaining more of their indigenous languages, social structures, and religious practices. When, centuries later, population movements and pressures from further east, like the Huns, occurred, these northern European groups interacted with a different kind of Roman world, one centered in Alexandria, overwhelming on its distant northern fringes. The barbarian successor kingdoms that eventually emerged in the west might have done so under different circumstances, possibly forming larger, more cohesive native federations before interacting with the periphery of the Alexandrian Roman sphere, or perhaps being drawn into its orbit as client states, with a greater degree of cultural autonomy. The deep Latinization of Western Europe, a hallmark of our timeline, was significantly less pronounced. Number 2. The many paths to the divine. Christianity's alternate course. The religious environment fostered by an Antony and Cleopatran empire, with its flourishing Greco-Egyptian mystery cults, its state-sanctioned worship of Isis and Serapis, and a protected temple-centered Judaism, created a profoundly different context for the emergence and spread of Christianity. Without the singular dominance of Rome and its eventual adoption of Christianity as a state religion, the faith of Jesus' followers took a vastly different trajectory. It likely remained one of many spiritual options in a vibrant religious marketplace. The version of Christianity that might have gained traction could have been more Gnostic, emphasizing secret knowledge and individual enlightenment, which would have resonated with the mystical tendencies of the prevailing Hellenistic Egyptian religious climate. Or it might have remained more closely aligned with Judaism as a messianic movement within it, especially given the continued existence and prominence of the temple in Jerusalem. Concept of a centralized church hierarchy, modeled on the Roman imperial administration, did not develop in the same way. Instead, diverse Christian communities might have evolved with a wide array of theological interpretations and practices more akin to philosophical schools or independent mystery traditions. Persecutions were less likely to be systematic or empire-wide, as the Antonian Empire was generally more syncretic and tolerant of varied religious expressions, provided they did not challenge imperial authority. Without the conversion of a figure like Constantine, and without the backing of a Rome-centered imperial power, Christianity did not become the dominant religion of the Mediterranean world or Europe. It existed, perhaps, influencing other faiths and being influenced in return, but the religious map of this world featured a far more pluralistic and enduring array of pagan, Jewish, and nascent philosophical spiritual movements for many centuries. Number 1. Alexandria soars. The dawn of mechanical flight in 550 AD. The sustained flourishing of the Great Library of Alexandria, coupled with the empire's focus on practical innovation and spectacle, led to an era of accelerated technological advancement that defied the patterns of our own history. Building upon the theoretical work of Hero of Alexandria concerning steam power and pneumatics, generations of engineers and inventors in the imperial workshops of Alexandria, funded by the immense wealth of Eastern trade, systematically pursued. By the 3rd century AD, sophisticated automata were common in public displays and even used for certain types DF labor. Steam-powered pumps aided in large-scale irrigation projects along the Nile and in mining operations. But a true marvel emerged from the intense study of aerodynamics and light construction. Inspired by ancient legends of flight and driven by the patronage of intellectually curious emperors and empresses of the Antonian Ptolemaic Julian dynasty, a dedicated institute for aerial motion was established within the Mausian. After centuries of incremental progress, from advanced kites and gliders tested from the Pharaoh's lighthouse or desert cliffs, the breakthrough occurred around 550 AD. An engineer named Icarus Menengekmus, no relation to the mythological figure, though he adopted the name, successfully demonstrated sustained, controlled flight using a lightweight wooden frame, fabric wings, and a compact, highly efficient steam engine driving propellers. The first public demonstration saw a winged craft take off from a specially constructed ramp near Lake Mauritius, circle the Serapeum, and land safely, to the astonishment of the Alexandrian populace and the imperial court. While initially these flying machines were fragile, expensive, and used primarily for imperial messaging, exploration, and spectacular displays, their invention marked a profound shift, heralding an age of discovery and interconnectivity, centuries before it would have otherwise been imagined, all launched from the vibrant heart of a Greco-Egyptian world empire.